You taught me a lot when it came to boundaries. And I saw with my own eyes, and I felt in spaces where you, as a professor, as a mentor to some, um, had to kind of navigate in a way because your students were being mistreated, and you had to. We talk about being a mammy or catering to people in those ways, in those spaces. It kind of made me think about that, but then also the dynamics of relationships between women of color, Black women, where you have to like assist. And maybe if you don't choose to, um, like you said in your book, you may be aligned with like the other power structures or not being a part of your community. So I want to talk a little bit about racial reconciliation, the ways in which we have to be intersectional, but then also how it shows up in the academy, and maybe best ways to make sure we are operating in what you're saying, how we should operate. So where does it become toxic? You know, these mentoring relationships or ways in which we care for each other.
Yeah. And, that's so hard because there are still very few Black women in the academy. Teaching my class yesterday about intersectionality. And one of the students asked the question, like, why are we just hearing about this? Like, why is it, they say Black women have been around for a long time. Like, we've been doing this work, justice work for a long time. Why are we starting to hear the term intersectionality? And I said, because we weren't in the academy. We didn't have seats at the table, right? It took getting Black women in the academy, and that didn't happen in significant numbers, really until the 90s. And those numbers are still slim. There are a lot of seminaries that have no Black women on faculty. There are a lot of seminaries that have one, right? Or two. I've spent a lot of my career being either the only one or being one of two. Actually, my entire academic career, I've either been alone or there were two of us. That was it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. As Black women. And that's 20 years, like in the academy. And that's been my experience. And so what happens is you have one Black faculty member and you might have dozens of Black students all needing someone, right? Because they are experiencing micro and macro aggressions in their context, in their classroom, from faculty, from staff, from other students, and they need a place to process that. And so they go to the Black faculty member who wants to be, right, who's there. We're often there because we are passionate about teaching Black students and we want to be in that place. But very often we're suffering from the same micro and macro aggressions that the students are suffering from, right? Like, so it's like, okay, I'm hurting, this place is hurting me. And at the same time, I'm trying to stand in the gap and keep them from hurting y'all too bad, right? Like, try,
because it's gonna happen.
It's gonna happen, and I only have so much power, right? And so there's that position that we're standing in, and then there's like even the fact that just when we show up, we're disruptive. Yeah. Right? Because one of the things I've learned is like for Black women in predominantly white spaces, literally by our presence, we are disruptive because we disrupt their assumptions about how the world should work. We come from a different life experience very often. We come from different theological worldviews very often. And so because we didn't, come out of the same cookie cutter, right? We see things differently. And so somebody says, this is a problem. And you're like, well, why don't we do it this way? Or things have been done this way all this time. And we say, well, why are we doing that? We question things, right? And so just our presence is disruptive to the space. And the vast majority of people, I think still who are professors, white faculty, and administrators in seminary spaces, they often have not worked in positions of equality with Black women and other women of color. Mm-hmm. They may be used to being, say, on the mission field, where the Black people and the other people of color are folks who need help from them. Yeah. Right. They're used to having that sort of hierarchy. And so they're not used to us showing up. And some of them, let's be real, because we're in the South, some of them like Black women, for them, are the maids. They, like, some of them had a Black maid in their family, right? Some of them grew up with that. They're used to seeing Black women as the help. And then here we show up with our doctorates, right? And our sense of personhood. And so literally just being in that space in ways they're not used to seeing Black women be in that space becomes a threat. And so as Black faculty members, we are always navigating all of this, right? And we're dealing with it at the same time as we're trying to help our students deal with it. We're trying to figure out, if we're tenured, what power do we have? How can we change it and make it better for somebody else, even though we might not even be able to make it better for ourselves, right? But we're trying to make it better for somebody else. And so that becomes a challenge all the time, but we're doing that out of our own call to racial justice, right? We're trying to embody it. Like, we're trying to live it out and make it happen in the spaces where we are to the best way that we can. And that can be a strain. And we can often get to the point where we pour from an empty cup. We can often get to the point where we're resentful. We often have, Black students who think that we're supposed to be their everything for them. There's a whole lot, like, if we talk about, kind of the idea of transference and countertransference, there's a whole lot of that. There's students who've never had Black female faculty before, right? They don't know how to deal with us. And so all of that just is a huge place, and is right for all types of strains and stresses. But unfortunately, the academy doesn't think about these things. They don't prepare us to think about these things. They certainly don't compensate us to be dealing with all of this, right? Like, pay for the therapy at least, right? Like,
something. Yeah.
Pay for something. And so you end up, a lot of times it's the burnout, because you might feel like you're getting it on both ends, right? You're like, you can't be enough for this group, you can't be enough for that group, and you're isolated. Because maybe there's one other person if you're lucky. Sometimes when we see schools that they've hired more than two, like, it's like nirvana to us. We're like, oh my God,
what's going on over there?
And so that so it can be a lonely and isolating place for us to be, and it can have a lot of stresses in it because of that. Even in a lot of the historically Black, because I've taught at both. At the historically Black seminary, there's still only 2 women, right? There were only 2 women on the faculty. And so we had to deal with the patriarchy in those contexts. And so it is not so easily, that's that whole intersectionality piece, right? That there are very few places that are made for us by us.